Originally given was over 2 hours long, so I have condensed it into about 25-30 minutes so we can have plenty of time for discussion. And it's important to note what this isn't. One thing it isn't is a water is wet presentation where you're going to see a whole lot of GPT writing sentences and doing graphs and doing cool stuff, because I think that most people have enough exposure with LLMs that they have a decent idea of what they can do, and are struggling a little bit more with the practical applications of how they can deploy these within their company. The other thing it isn't is not vector databases and like the rocket science that goes on below the hood and the neural networks as far as really getting deep in there. If you can walk away with a couple of practical tools that you can use either yourself as a marketer or as a business owner, and that you importantly can impart on your staff to enable them to use LLMs to amplify what they're doing, I think that's a win. At any time, by all means, break in and ask questions. It's much more fun if you do that. Then we're going to get started there. So we're going to talk a little bit about prompting and how to coax things out of LLMs. What are the right tools that are out there? We may touch a little bit on changing of the landscape of what this means for pretty much every industry everywhere. And at the end of the day, it's like I usually give this presentation for owners. Like a lot of companies have just locked down on LLMs, say, no, you can't use this. And they're afraid of deploying it within their organizations for legitimate security issues, quality of work, or they have this sort of idea that it's going to be a shortcut for their staff, and their staff is suddenly not going to be doing their work. This is by far my favorite slide in all of this, and if you remember anything, it's going to be this slide. It's just this Venn intersection of what an LLM is, as far as what you know is in this yellow circle over here. It's everything that makes you. It's your education, it's your experience, it's your training, it's just the mileage. The big giant blue circle on the other side is what the LLMs know, and the actual size of these circles would be like the size of this building and the size of a marble pretty much, because it pretty much knows everything about everything, right? And what's really important as you're talking about LLMs with your staff, or you're considering how to use them, is this zone right over here. It's where the two intersect. It's what you know and it's what the LLM knows, because that's the zone where at the moment you can really rely on the tools to amplify your work, that it's not just making it up as it goes along. And your art lives in here somewhere. The farther that you get out away from that zone of amplification, I call it the zone of the dragons, like you're picturing an old-timey map where like you're going to fall off the end of the world if you're sailing off into the distance. The farther you get away from what you know, the less likely you are to be able to validate the information that you're getting from the LLM, and the less useful it's going to be. Like I can talk all day long about digital marketing and mountain biking and whatnot and have a good sense of what I'm talking about, but you get me over into internal medicine or neuroscience or something like that, it's going to get pretty sketchy pretty quick. What's really cool about it is that intersection is different for everyone. If you happen to be a physician who specializes in internal medicine, that is your zone of amplification, right? So you can operate right in that zone. Okay, so what is it really good at? One would be brainstorming. So it's having a partner that's always there for you as far as very rapidly coming up with ideas, going back and forth and refining things. Solving the dreaded blank page problem. I know this is a marketing club, so most of us know how to write, but I think everybody at one time or another suffers from blank page syndrome, where you're looking at an email, you're looking at a document, you're trying to figure out what's next, and wouldn't it be nice to be able to work from a draft? So getting to that draft as rapidly as possible without the brain damage that can occur and just staring at that blank page, I think it's absolutely exceptional there. Being able to rapidly summarize complicated documents, concepts, websites, etc. Being able to gut check the sort of things that you've already produced in terms of content. Image prompting, we've all seen Midjourney, DALL-E, et cetera, and the sort of neat stuff that can come out of there. But being able to very rapidly ideate and create storyboards as a marketer is enormously powerful, particularly for those of us who can barely draw a straight line, like that, not really on that creative continuum, but now I can bypass that sort of creative ideation process and get a whole bunch of ideas on the table really, really quick. And where's it bad? At the moment, facts are really pretty dubious. Unless those facts are really closely held to you, you probably don't want to trust it because it's eager to please. It's like this omnipotent personal assistant who knows everything about everything and occasionally lies to you very earnestly. So unless you can actually validate the information it's putting out, be that code, be that statutes, be it regs, be it law, whatever, you should not trust it at the moment. That's all coming. Like, this is happening so fast that in the next 4 or 5 months, a lot of solutions will be in place that will help you validate those tools, but at the moment, don't trust it for facts. It's porous. There are a lot of data analysis tools that, as a digital marketer, I deal with billions of points of data. Within controlled environments, I can use LLMs to do massive amounts of analysis without diving into nasty SQL statements and things like that, which I can read, but I can't write. So it's liberated my ability to go straight to the source of the data and draw conclusions. That's fantastic, except when you put the data out there into the model, it's now in the model. And I think that very rightfully, this is a concern that most business operators have as far as what data is being used for training when, no matter what the different platforms say about how they're using it for training. On the flip side, there's a practical aspect of this, that if your data is getting out there into the training set, somebody would have to know the right questions to ask to triangulate the right data to get to the formula for Coke or whatever it might be that's hidden in there. So there's sort of a practical element, but if you're putting customer records and data out there, I think you have some legal concerns as well. So, okay. So first, context is king. Being able to set the context within an LLM is super important. Imagine that you're in Times Square, you're standing on top of the Flatiron Building, and you just throw your arms wide and say, what book should I read? Just to the assembled masses. People are going to shout out whatever thing. They're going to shout out the Bible. They're going to shout out this Ken Follett book. They're going to shout out whatever, because they have absolutely no idea what your context is. Now, imagine instead that you amble into your local bookstore and you're ambling into the science fiction section and that there is an associate there. What book should I read? Well, they're going to have a pretty good idea from the context that you're standing there in science fiction and that you've told them a lot about what you're actually looking for, and they're going to say, aha, here you go, right? The same is true as far as how the LLMs work. And we hear about prompting all the time, and there was this brief window where everybody was creating these really complicated prompts, me included, that were trying to get like 15 things done at once. And the problem with that is the prompts never did a great job of setting the context for the conversation. So backing up a little bit, setting the context for what are we looking for? We're looking for something in science fiction. What do you like? I like these things, is a much more effective process than just trying to cram a whole bunch of information down the LLM's throat. So yeah, okay. So that's context. Okay, next concept is constrained versus unconstrained data. So I think a pretty good example here. So again, standing on top of a building and just asking a question to Google, what's my tracking number? So again, direct to consumer, we deal with this stuff all the time, right? What's going on with my stuff? The LLM is trained on all the information about tracking numbers in the entire world. It has no idea what you're talking about. But if you instead were to constrain the data to your own records, your own SOPs within your organization, you're drawing its focus into the narrow piece of information that you're looking for. So you've set context, we're talking about customer service. You've constrained the data saying we're talking about customer service within the data that's contained within our organization. Now let's yield results that have to do with tracking numbers and our data in there. Does that make sense?
Can I ask a quick question?
No.
Is there, I mean, I can wait if you prefer, but.
No, I'm kidding.
Is there a way to do the constrained data, but have it just be not have it be part of the model learning, or is it?
So the short answer is yes. The long answer is it's complicated. As far as small pieces of information, it's relatively easy to constrain your data using existing tools that are offered either as plugins or increasingly as sort of standalone product-based businesses, like in smaller sets of data. What you're rapidly going to be seeing is deployments of corporate trained LLMs that are using some of the various frameworks that are out there, notably Llama, which is Meta's framework. And you're also going to see GPT being run as an instance through Microsoft Azure, where you can basically trigger it on such that it's creating a sandbox that is supposedly non-porous. That is yet to be demonstrated, and I'm sure various Russians will figure out ways around it. But at the moment, it's a little kludgy. Like you're going to have to, you can set context within a set of documents, 100 pages of documents, 1,000 pages of documents, but what's being influenced from the outside on a personal level, it gets a little bit shaky, and you need to know that. You always need to know that it's pulling information from other places too. We'll get to the point, and this isn't just me being a futurist, we will get to the point where we all have our own little trained versions that are trained on how we behave, how we respond, the things that we know, the things that are in our document set, and those will probably sit subordinate to larger systems in enterprises. And people will become trillionaires in figuring out how all of those pieces work together. Work. There we go. So some of the basic rules, if your staff or you are interacting with it, is that first question is establishing those Venn intersections, right? How much do I actually know about what I'm talking about here? If you know a lot about it, fantastic. Like, as a business owner, I deal with contracts all the time. Like, you guys, your whole business is contracts, right? So, like, I'm not a lawyer, but I've read thousands of contracts. So I have a pretty good idea of what I'm looking at. So I can pretty much dive right in and get a sense that I know what I'm talking about, or that it's yielding something that's going to be useful to me. A little, like, I know something about this, I know something about quantum theory. Not that much, but I know something about it. Trust but verify, essentially. And the farther you get away from your knowledge, the more you're going to need to be able to trust it or test it. And this is an area that's really cool as far as with code. And the efficacy of LLMs for code will continue to increase. Right now, it kind of ebbs and flows. But the good news about code is you can run it and you can test it. Did it work? Did it do what it was supposed to do? That's great. That's pretty much binary. And if you know nothing about it, now you're getting like way off into the distance somewhere, and you should probably figure out how to find additional source material to triangulate how useful it's going to be to you. Okay, so just an example of like kind of good and bad ways of how to do this. And I really hate all of these marketing talking heads who are like, just toss in a bunch of information and output a blog post that's SEO optimized. I have a very strong opinion that in terms of how the internet is built and how the internet is incentivized, that we're very quickly going to be leaning into a period where novel content, new content that's coming into the system is going to be more highly valued than regurgitated content. And when the table stakes become, just toss it in a blog post, like, how much do you know about, how much do I know about bed bugs or pinky toes or whatever it is, like, if that's table stakes and there are now 500 blog posts about the same thing, those same blog posts are going to be used to train the LLMs, and sort of bad data in, bad data out. You're going to start recirculating garbage, and you will make them dumber. So if that's the case, how do you make them smarter? You need to make sure that there's new and novel inputs going into the system. How best do you do that? You create winners as far as the bidding structures and the ad networks, and in terms of SEO and LLM-based answers, such that those who can put out new and novel material will get rewarded that way. And that means finding scholarly articles, contextualizing the scholarly article about bed bugs, and then creating new content that otherwise would never have been surfaced because some random thesis out of the University of South Carolina about these little buggers. Just an example of kind of the old way of like how the process can work. And my point is that, yes, it's cute that you can just toss in a topic and spit out an SEO optimized blog, but it's really not that much harder to amplify the sort of information that you need for a really novel blog that has a more likely opportunity to be rewarded in the future. Yeah, there are a few steps, but it's nothing like this. I mean, Kat, the amount of time that goes into creating content is just huge, right? If you can kind of leap to this end where your art is the massaging of the LLM output versus novel material with your voice in place, you still have an obligation and you still have art in massaging that information in a way that's going to be appropriate to your consumers. It just takes a heck of a lot less time. All right, some key tools in here. So tools that I'm using that I use daily in GPT-4. So people often ask, well, should I pay for GPT? The answer is yes, you should. It's $20 a month. And for $20 a month, you get a smarter engine with a gazillion more connections in its neural network. And you also get utility in terms of the sort of plugins that are available in the system. And as leaders, I think this is really fascinating because you're basically seeing the viscera that's going to sit underneath the future industry of LLMs and how that works. So the business models that are getting surfaced in terms of plugins are going to be the features of tomorrow's LLMs. So it's telegraphing how that's going to work. As an entrepreneur, I would love to say that LLMs are going to create all of these app store type ecosystems. But I do suspect that a lot of the thousands and thousands of little companies that have been started are turning into just layers on top of the LLM that will soon enough become productized. All the cool little things that even I might use as far as like removing backgrounds for images and things like that. It's great that I've paid them couple $100 to remove backgrounds, but their business is going to go away pretty much the second these platforms add multimodal like image processing in there. Visual, so Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, 11 Labs does voices. We're coming into an election cycle. It should be pretty exciting to see how all of this stuff is nefariously deployed because it's really, really, really good and it's getting better by the day. If you haven't seen some of the deep fake stuff, I highly recommend you take a look at it. I found myself calling my 85-year-old mother the other day and developing a safe word with her because I'm on podcasts and things like that all the time, so my voice is out there. So it would be trivial for somebody to come up with a basic bot that sort of sounds like me and call her up and try and get access to her accounts or something. So that was sort of a creepy family moment, I think. But I use all of these tools all the time. There's an AI for that. It's quite fun. It's listing, I believe this morning it was 6,900 different AIs. So it has a search function that allows you to look for a specific task, and you'll come up with a whole bunch of different options. Okay, so other approachable uses, quickly summarizing information. Talking to documents, I think, is quite exciting. Being able to put a PDF in. I do this with contracts on the other side. Put a contract in, have a conversation with the contract about my level of indemnification or if the contract is one-sided or not. I like two-sided contracts. That's super useful. Being able to put information like URLs into the system to do a quick check as far as SEO value and find quick wins. Job descriptions. I've used job descriptions just this morning, as a matter of fact, product descriptions, etc. I thought this was a fun one. This is actually another company that I'm involved in. Just a good example of how you can just very quickly use an LLM layer to summarize information. So this is taking an individual product from Amazon, coming up with sentiment, coming up with possible topics. Like if you're the product manager who's in charge of this product, this is a bonanza for you. This is a lot of work of the sort of things that you can come up with. No, don't do that. Okay, there it goes. So some examples of stock art. So Midjourney is a little bit different on how it works in terms of prompting, and you really only have one shot at it at the moment. That will change. But I thought this was a great example of just a piece of stock art that I came up with as far as the Inkworks brand. That woman does not exist and has no usage rights. So how awesome for me that I don't have to like renegotiate with her every 3 years as far as being able to use it. And it's pretty dang usable. So as a marketer, I'm constantly coming up with landing page ideas. Obviously, this is like lorem ipsum type text that's in there, but being able to put a prompt in there that it specifies colors and theme and whatnot that you can then work with as far as a starting point for a real designer, super useful. Come on. Product design. So quick product concepts, being able to put art into it, feed out ideas. Again, this is just a starting point. Like obviously it's going to have to go to a real designer to get to a point where any of this stuff is usable, but being able to quickly come up with those sort of ideas. So we've pretty much already talked about this as far as the evolution and my theories about layers on top of the LLM not being sustainable. And anybody who's in the investor class, I'd highly recommend steering away from anything that can be replicated in the platform by a few clicks. So the places where I'm placing my bets are within areas that can be amplified by the sort of output that can come out of the engines. So my letter writing business, for example, just gets better as the outputs from the system get better and there are more connections. The output, the content is richer, and I still have a barrier as far as creating the end product. Okay, so I'm not going to necessarily go through this, but I think it's a good example of setting context and diving into a process with a creative partner. A lot of small businesses don't have the luxury of having a creative director on staff, but the founder better have a pretty good idea of the direction they're heading. And being able to have these sort of conversations with it can be super, super useful. So this output is going from basic values of the Inkworks organization to some hooks, to some angles, to a production-based script for the sort of video that I might want to pursue. It's not perfect, but it's really not bad. So I casted it, I did costumes, I did lines, like the whole bit there. Now all I have to do is actually shoot the video. So now you have a script that comes out the other end.
I have a question. So I use ChatGPT 4.0, but I've been using Bard AI. I just feel like the information is much more current.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I'm correct, 2021 is kind of the ending point for ChatGPT. I think the plugins kind of help access a little bit more, but do you feel that we're going to come to a point where Bard AI, because it's cloud-based and it's connected when I log in, I don't have to sign in like I do chat. Will it be connected to Google Sheets? Will we be looking at Google Docs? Is that something that we can look to going forward or moving forward? Will it be connected to all those applications that you have?
Absolutely, and that's happening very, very quickly. In fact, Google's rolling out all of those integrated features right now, and she makes a good point that the GPT cutoff is September of 2021. You can use plugins to read more current links. And Bing itself has the ability to interact with browsers, but it gets pretty hazy because there aren't enough training points in the near term. So the more recent something is, if you wanted to have an in-depth conversation with Bard or Bing about Lahaina and the firestorm right there, it's a pretty high likelihood of going haywire right now. I also don't particularly love the branded, I'm going to call them the branded LLMs, mainly Bing and Bard, even though Bing is backed by GPT, that they have a tighter control on what's called their constitution, which this is good, but there's essentially this whole underlying set of prompts that you don't see when you run a prompt. That's basically, don't be evil, don't be racist, like, don't teach people how to make bombs. If they ask about medical information, steer them otherwise. Those controls in the consumer-facing branded search engines are way tighter than they are in GPT, and in GPT they're way tighter than they are on some of the other platforms that are out there as well. So you have to decide just how wild you want your experience to be. And there's a piece of vocabulary there called temperature. So they talk about high temperature versus a low temperature. If you apply by default a really high temperature, it's going to loosen its connections and its security in the answers. And that can be super useful if you're brainstorming, but it's also going to make stuff up like constantly. So you have to be aware that you're dealing with an LLM that's basically on mushrooms versus something that's just the facts. And if you're dealing with Bing or Bard, that temperature is very, very low. I think from a practical amplification perspective, you get a better result from some of the other platforms as far as brainstorming and such.
Kind of continue on the theme. I've used ChatGPT for two things, basically. One, I'm a software engineering manager, so I actually used it to try prototyping some system code. And I did have issues there, like you said. Even with a low temperature, it was giving me wrong information that I had to use my own expertise to fix. But the second thing I used it for was I run a nonprofit in the area, and I was trying to look up information about my nonprofit, and I ran into the same issue where it's got 2021 data. And so I said, okay, well, how can I update your system to put me in there? And they said, well, send us an email at this thing. It's been 5-6 months, still doesn't come up, right? So in terms of people beginning to use it to search for information, if you want to put yourself in as a data point for your entity, is there actually a way, an applicable, practical, working way to do that?
So there are ways to exclude yourself. If you have business reasons why you do not want the LLM crawlers, particularly GPT, to crawl your site, you can block that. But as far as inclusion and actually inspiring the crawler to hit your site first, frankly, I don't know. Do you have any idea of?
I would say just a plugin, probably. Like giving it context to like a PDF or something, and like it would suck because it would only be like to look, like it would be constrained to the conversation you would have on ChatGPT. But yeah, that's what comes to mind. There probably are plugins that you could just use, like a vectorized data store, to have like your own personal information.
But
okay, but that doesn't help for other people using GPT, right? I mean, that's the main problem.
Unless you were to like make your own plugin.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I mean, my issue is on the internet. If you say does an organization of this type exist in Park City, and it gives me 5 hits, which are all defunct, and mine, which is the only active one,
it's just time.
is not in there.
It's time.
Probably going to come up with it, right?
Huh?
Like Google will probably come up with the thing to connect ChatGPT, so it'll be searchable.
Well, ChatGPT used to have that feature, but they rolled it back, I think, because I don't know exactly why they did it, because it used to be, it's in Bing now, but it's not in ChatGPT. You used to be able to search the web with it before if you were on the beta version. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
So that's the answer, is that as search and LLMs come together, you are increasingly going to see them complementing each other. So the not-for-profit that's not indexed and not in the training data set will appear in the search results because it still has a high SEO relevance, right?
Yeah.
And as a marketer, the opportunity to a degree is to identify how that's actually going to work when they come together, and LLM search becomes more the norm than it is right now, because it's not at all the norm. That's the saving grace here, is most people aren't using it for that. Like, is there a not-for-profit for saving whatever in Park City? No, they're going to go to Google for that.
Okay, but so as of right now, nobody in this room has any success with having ChatGPT fix its data point. Correct?
No.
No one has had any.
It's kind of just waiting for OpenAI to update it.
And it'll be like they'll release GPT-5 at some point, and it'll be included in that data set, and then it won't be in somebody else's data set, and it'll be sort of constant. And that's why I made that point earlier about novel information in. If you give it a really good reason, and I feel strongly about this, if you give it a good reason from an SEO perspective that this is new and different information, then it probably has a greater likelihood of getting picked up. If it instead identifies, your content as being similar to 8,000 other pages, it's not going to be very excited about that. I don't want to anthropomorphize it too much, but by calling it it.
How far separate is the AI, what you're talking about, just from Google search, and what advancements they make to the search capability of that to incorporate some of the things you're talking about?
Oh, it's happening right now. If you use Bing or Bard, you will get some real-time results and some guidance from AI answering your question. How do I do this? Type question. It'll yield results, and you can dive into that traditional rabbit hole. That's going to limit the real estate for the ad markets, which can be incredibly destructive for those of us who depend on ad markets for our living, because there's just less room. It's a real estate game. And if you have the LLM answers plus the search answers, they're probably going to be using sponsored answers because that's where they get their dollar, right? And that'll take up so much space that where we used to be able to sort of rank on the edges for certain types of topics just won't really be surfaced. And that puts us in a dangerous place of a much shallower internet. It's much broader under the surface, but people won't touch it, I suspect.
So you think there'll be a market for separate products distinct from what Google or Bing are trying to do? To filter out some of the noise that you're suggesting would be involved if Google were just to try to dominate?
They're so dominant, and when GPT came out and Microsoft's investment in GPT was so obvious, oh my gosh, Bing is going to dislodge Google. It has not dislodged Google. It continues to make up single-digit percentage of overall search, and I believe it is the better search product with LLM at the second. But Google isn't sleeping. They're paying attention, and they have that eye share and they have that market share. So I wouldn't bet on somebody coming in with some clever new search product and try and beat down the gazillion searches a day that Google has. I wouldn't bet against Google for sure. I wouldn't bet against Microsoft either. And in general, you have all of these big platforms that are just going to win more. Like in imagery, as I had Adobe Firefly up there, it's like magic. The way that they've integrated some of the generative AI into their image processing, and they already have 70% market share as far as creative processing is concerned. So if that's the case, some new insurgent is going to chip away at their share, but it's not going to change the lay of the land very much. Google Docs integrating Bard features into it, that's going to be killer. Microsoft Teams having all of these features that are just baked in. And we'll be seeing all of that in the next 6 months, which will cause a hemorrhaging of enterprise value for lots and lots of companies that have taken on absurd amounts of money for no apparent reason. Biased.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask, do you have any ideas about how intellectual property and copyright and all that's going to play out specifically? I'm an architect, and sort of more visually oriented programs are appealing.
So, not a lawyer, but one is you already see the licensing of these databases of Getty by Adobe and Adobe's own internal databases. You're seeing the ability to opt out. This is a reason why you would use that robot text fields on your website to hide your information, at least from GPT. So it's not included in the training set. I mean, it comes down to almost a philosophical argument of what is original content and what is influenced content, and people can debate that all day. I think we'll see some court cases that will have some results in that respect in the next 6 months to 12 months at some point. I personally think they're losers as far as cases, not the people getting upset about it. I absolutely get their concern, but and using their name, if you haven't copyrighted your name and you're an artist, you better get out and copyright your name, because that's going to be one of the defenses that you have. You can copyright your architecture firm or your name as a designer. So if somebody was, design a house in the style of architect Kevin Williams, can't draw a straight line, so it's not me, but that you could enforce your intellectual property rights based on that copyright. But if you don't have any right to your own name until you file a copyright on it, which isn't very hard, by the way.
Kevin, do you have a source for when you need a particular plugin or a particular AI to do something, like for instance, video creation? I saw the one, there's an AI for that. But
Yeah.
it feels like there are so many plugins and platforms. It's like I don't have the time or interest to like go through
I'm not
and
gonna get
test
there.
each one. And
I am sort of obsessed with this, obviously, and I have daily digests that I get. There's one called AI Breakfast that I like, but I get about 7 of them, and I think they're all just stealing from each other, to be honest. But trying to stay abreast of it, and if I see a tool that catches my eye, I'll give it a go. For instance, I'll take the piece here, and I'll feed it into an AI that's going to dice it into 45 to 90-second segments that I may be able to repurpose as content. Super cool. And most of it's garbage, but there'll be a few pieces that'll be spread around in there. The original version of this presentation, which was not as cute as this one, I did because of the shtick to like put it into an AI deck generator, and it was okay. It did a decent job. It got the deck done, but it still took a lot of editing work, which at the end of the day, don't look for 100% solution yet. You're looking for 80% solutions that you can apply your art to really solve a problem. But not to answer your question, so many toys. I do go to those various databases, and when I see one, I just bookmark it, and often I don't have any need to use it yet. So over time.
If we kind of want to wait until something pops up, how long do you think it's going to be?
Oh, you need to be using it now. I mean, no joke. Like this is a steamroller that's coming for us, and it is going to be highly, highly disruptive. I think of my own organizations and my human resources stack, and there are real people who are endangered, and that doesn't make me feel super warm and fuzzy, but that is the way this is going to play out in a lot of organizations. That I do not need 4 copywriters. I need 1 copywriter who can produce the work that the 4 were doing plus some, and they have the voice and they're hammering at it. There are a lot of different roles, and this year, to get philosophical again, I think we're in this 12-month period of ooh and ah, and people are starting to play with it, and they're like, oh, okay, this is kind of useful. It's going to get really useful as time goes on, and it just improves. As somebody who's in it every day, it improves every week, and next year will be the year of disruption. And I have real concerns about what that's going to look like as the more mercenary organizations get their teeth into it, and they're like, customer service? Ha! Off they go. American Express dismisses 15,000 customer service reps.
I actually think I spoke with the robot the other day.
You probably did.
Yeah, and it was actually pretty useful.
And
On the phone?
Yes, it was a voice. And it sounded like a robot, and I asked him, I'm like, are you a robot? And it was like, no, I'm a human. And I'm like, I don't believe you. It sounded like a robot, and it just was very standardized, but I was like, holy crap, that was fairly.
But getting back to the point, you can't avoid it. You've got to dabble in it. You've got to see I have it just up all day long, and believe me, some days I'm like, that output sucks. I feel like it's GPT-4 has days of stupidity, as they're playing with their internal models.
Hasn't it gotten worse over time?
It does feel like it's gotten a little bit worse. It's still quite good.
Good days and it's bad days.
But some days it's just flat out stupid, and it's like you can kind of feel it if you use it a lot. And I think it's them dialing up and down how they're running their prompts in the back end, and it's costing so much money to do this that they're trying to dial it back a little bit, save some money now and again.
I think they're going to start charging us though. This could be a big number.
They do charge.
I mean,
they do. I mean, I'm not using it.
Yeah, the plus. They give you 1
and if you want to use your own token, so that's what the processing bits are called, or they're tokens. So they're a way to sort of shenanigans to tie into the API and enable an entire staff to run run off of your tokens, and you can run off the GPT-4 model. It's out of scope for this, but each one of those tokens costs a fraction of a cent. And if as an organization is running lots and lots of queries, or some cool like plugin that you're using is running lots of queries, somebody's paying the piper for those. So they definitely have revenue. I don't think that they're as excited about consumer grade revenue as they are from like business level processing type revenue. That's where the billions of dollars will be made.
I've got a kind of an interesting, different question. I ran marketing and eventually strategy at IHOP for 15 years. And I wonder what AI is going to do to people that did what I used to do now.
So, it's not the AI that's going to take the jobs. This is becoming a trite phrase, but it's somebody who knows how to use the AI.
Right.
And a creative oriented CMO, director of marketing type who knows how to use these tools can lean down the sort of stack that they need for marketing output to an absurd extent. So you could run even a large organization like that. You might find that the AI augmented marketing stack of next year or 2 years from now is like 5-6 people that are the best of the people that they had, who are the best at their particular art. But you still need those points of art that are in there until we get to some sort of AGI that can really replace us all, which, by the way, is probably coming. So that will be interesting to see. Hopefully you're on the good ledger, not the bad ledger. Yeah. Well, but people in this room, it's not really a problem. At certain stages of your career, we are the people who have art and we have expertise, and you have these business models. But imagine just being like a third-year law student at Omaha Sub-State University right now. You don't have a future. And you need to really think carefully about what you're going to be doing with yourself, because low-level contract law is one of the first things that's just going to go away. Partner's still going to be there. White shoe law firms are still going to be there, but all of the people who are running around in the background drafting stuff, no. At this point, you can already record a conversation, feed it into one of the drafting programs, and spit out, I need an estate for X, Y, and Z circumstance in Wyoming. And previously, the partner would have taken the call with a very important client and then turned to their first-year associate and said, write this document. And then he would have had to read it at the end. Now he's just skipping that step. He's listening to the conversation. The conversation is going to be transcribed. He's going to press a button. It's going to draft it. He still has to read it because that's his art. Has to make sure it's good, right? Doesn't need that associate. Doesn't need that paralegal. And it's going to disrupt a lot of people in process-oriented, paper shuffling type roles.
Kevin, I'm curious. I suspect this question is probably very hard to answer right now, just in general. And it's probably also very context dependent, but thinking ahead to a future where an organization like mine and probably most of ours are going to want some kind of constrained customer service instance, are there any best practices or principles that you would focus on applying in terms of the type of connectivity between CRM and documents and like internal tools, like basically how to set up your architecture in a way that's going to make whatever emerges?
It depends on what you're built on. If you're a Google-based organization, you're going to find that you're going to want to lean into being a Google-based organization, that making connections between BigQuery and your Sheets program is going to be way easier than trying to incorporate random CRMs or things like that in there. So standardization is going to be one. Interoperability is going to be interesting. I am a data nerd, but I am not a data detail nerd. So I like to use the outputs from data, but what I was explaining earlier as far as being able to massage data sets and be able to interact with them is really cool, but it's basically made data structures almost fungible, because that's essentially in 30 years of internet development, like trillions of dollars has been spent and earned on regimenting data structures. Well, that's all kind of breaking down. Like, you can take a bowl of spaghetti that is data, and you can make sense of it. And if that's the case, the sort of connectivity and glue that's going to start occurring between platforms is another point of weakness for enterprise SaaS companies that are out there, because the glue companies are going to become less relevant when in natural language you can connect the dots using a Zapier or something like that. That's the other piece, is connectors like Zapier that have large-scale adoption will probably be very, very powerful, and all of a sudden we'll be able to do a lot more. Like the idea of using Zapier to do like complex data analysis, like it's totally silly, but you could do it even already if you had a good head on your shoulders. I know that's not helpful as far as best practice, because a lot of this stuff's still coming and it's very much in flux, and choosing winners in that, I don't know, let's go to Vegas.
I'm curious what your take is on sort of at least in the short term, the use, like the utility of like fine-tuned models. If you think like for instance, even OpenAI is like fine-tuned modeling, do you think that they'll be sort of overtaken by chat completion, or are they sort of like in their own field,
I think fine-tuned models will still be important, at least in the near term. The idea of a fine-tuned model is that it's more subject matter specific, and it's been trained in this narrow sort of way, and that presets context. It's the idea of a data set that's more fine-tuned towards, say, law, something like that. But I don't have the right technical heft to really opine on whether or not that's going to work. Tricky question, though.
As a writer and content creator, some of this is really validating. Like for years, decades, I've been teaching people to tell their stories, to share their perspective, to have a unique point of view, things like that. And now, like for co-working spaces, which is my primary market, it doesn't matter if you can churn out an SEO post really quickly. It's like the stories of your space, and like the marketing club, for instance, like if I plugged into ChatGPT or whatever, like that's not a good thing because it's not that current. But to be like, what happened last night at the marketing club? And it might be like, well, Kevin Williams talked about AI for leadership and blah, blah, blah. But like the story of what was here is completely missing, and that's the superpower for people to differentiate, to make a noise, to show up, the novel content you were talking about.
I love it, but tonight as an exercise, I can feed this transcript in, and I could come up with a pretty solid 80-85% blog post on what we talked about here and what the other opinions were and who talked. And is it going to be lacking in human feel? Yeah, but again, that's my obligation, is to add that extra bit of human feel to the content. But I would totally cheat and be able to put it in there and get reasonably good output, because this is novel. This event is novel, and this particular presentation of context is novel. So it has utility versus a pile of these and then asking the GPT to come up with a blog post about leadership frameworks in AI, right? Because this event is singular, I guess. I don't mean to be cynical about it, and I do believe that there's a huge amount of value to the art of creatives. There'll just be fewer of them that are involved in the process, and they will be extremely highly valued, I think. I hope.